Hi there, and welcome to another episode of the Sinister Ideas podcast. I am Danny Thompson, the left-handed writer, your host. And let's call today's episode Sinister Ideas on, let's say, job security. All right. Over the end of last week, I had the pleasure of speaking at a leadership gathering for my employer, and we got a couple of hundred of, business leaders from our branches around 21 states. And I spoke about a project that I had a pretty big part in originating and creating, and now am pushing out into the rest of the company. And the initial results on that project have been really, really promising. And so it was my chance to share with these people who are out in the field doing the hard work, things we have come up with to help make their jobs a little bit easier, including some numbers for how they're changing things and making things easier in the field. And as I was coming home from this event, it was actually a 3-hour bus ride, and I got to thinking about this event and how meaningful it was to me, because, I do want to make life as easy as possible for the people in the field in my company, to be as successful as possible. And it all goes back to something I've talked about before, where a philosophy that I got from my grandfather in my youth. I was probably 15 or 16 when we were having this conversation. And he said, if you want job security, make yourself as indispensable as possible to as many people as possible. And he made clear that it wasn't about, you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours. It's not that kind of thing. It is akin to what today would be called servant leadership, right? And the company I work for makes that easy because we all have a common goal. And the stated company, it's not the mission, but our statement of purpose is to create opportunity and empower people. And everybody in the company adheres to that because the leadership makes it easy. So those of us in the corporate office, our job is to create opportunities for the people in the field to help the people there in the field to help, which is basically our teammates. And it's to empower them to do that as efficiently and as effectively as possible. Their goal is to create opportunities for workers on the front lines and empower them to improve their life in at least some small way. So the mindset I inherited from my grandfather really fits in here. And I was thinking about how this is just one of the ways in the short year and a half that I've been here that I've been able to make myself indispensable to as many people as possible. And that's by figuring out what other people need and being willing to step in and at least help them get what they want, if not find a way to give that to them. And I'm thinking about, some of the people on my team who were younger and even my own kids, and think, all right, what is the process that I have used? Because it's just one facet. There are several other ways that I have stepped in to try to, I try to make my boss's life easier. I try to make my coworkers' life easier. I try to make the team that works under me, I try to make their life easier. The people out in the field who I'm serving, I try to make their life easier. And I try to, in some small way that I can, even the teammates who we're putting to work for other companies, I try to make their life easier too. And my official role is senior copywriter, right? I do marketing copy and I help oversee the social media operations. A lot of the stuff that I'm doing is not actually part of my official job description. These are things that are over and above. And so I was thinking of the process that I use to be able to do that and still be able to successfully complete the functions that I've been hired to do. And I realized that when I come into a new place, a new job, or even a new role within the same job, I try to pay attention to what I call the 5 C's. All right. These are things that I look for in order to help the people around me be more successful in their roles. First thing is, what do they complain about, right? What are the hot spots? What are the things that annoy them or anger them or weigh heavily on them, right? If you can step in and do those things for them, or help come up with a way to make it easier to do those things, then you're providing value for them beyond the scope of your job. All right, so that's the first one. What do people complain about? Next is, where do they cut corners? All right, there are some things where the processes are just, unwieldy or repetitive or boring or even difficult. And, it's Thursday or Friday, it's been a long week, it's the end of a long day, and, there are things that, you can kind of get away with not doing. What are those things? Right? And again, how can you either take those on so they don't have to do them, or how can you help refine the process to make it less tedious or less difficult or less boring, for lack of a better word. All right. The next one is, what is consuming their time? Right? Everybody pretty much has a multitude of tasks that they're supposed to carry out in their job. Some of them take an inordinate amount of time for, the impact they actually have. I've kind of developed a knack through my career from way back in my days managing hotels of sort of identifying bottlenecks and streamlining processes to make them simpler or easier or give them more impact. So if you can identify those things that consume an inordinate amount of time for your coworkers or your boss or your employees, then again, you're adding value, you're making their job easier, and you're helping make them more productive and hopefully helping them enjoy their job more. All right, the fourth of the 5 C's is what things seem overly complex. Right, this is similar to the previous one with consumed time. Sometimes it's because these are just very, very complex or complicated, and they don't need to be. So where is effort being duplicated? Where are there steps that can be cut without damaging the overall output of the process? Where are we taking 3 steps when we could take 1? Where are we filling out 4 or 5 pieces of paperwork when we can be filling out 1 or 2 or 3? Look for things that are overly complicated and then think, all right, what is the actual outcome here that we need? What are the specific things we need from this process? And then reverse engineer that and see if you can come up with something a little simpler to help. And finally, the 5th C is, when are people calling for help? Right? Sometimes it's just, they're just overloaded with work and just literally don't have enough hours in the day or enough hands to be able to do it, and they're calling for help, right? Sometimes you're reaching a point where you don't have the information you need and don't know how to get it, and so they call out for help. Right? Sometimes something breaks, and maybe it breaks frequently, and they call out for help. Right? If people are calling out for help at the same point, or calling out for help for the same thing over and over and over, then that's an opportunity for you to try to provide a solution that removes the obstacle that ends up leading to that call for help. Now, so those are the 5 C's that I think incorporate most of the ways that I have ended up being helpful, by making myself as indispensable as possible to as many people as possible. And it's literally just paying attention, seeing where people are encountering pain in their day-to-day processes, and seeing if you can help either alleviate that burden or remove that obstacle altogether. And so once again, what do people complain about? Where do they cut corners? What consumes their time? When are things too complicated? And when are people calling for help? And intent is really a big part of this. Yes, the result of this for me is that I make myself as indispensable as possible to as many people as possible. Because if as many people as possible appreciate you and like having you around, it's less likely that you're going to lose your job. It doesn't completely negate that, because I have had jobs that I've been fired from before, including one where, my efforts to become indispensable were so appreciated that, my property became one of the test properties whenever we had new policies or procedures that we were trying to roll out. And a lot of times, me and my team at the hotel had actually helped create those procedures and policies. But in the long run, it does provide you with more job security, because one, if you're truly improving your boss's life beyond the scope of your actual job, then they're not going to want to get rid of you. Second, if there are people in other departments who appreciate what you're doing for them over and above the call of duty for your own job, then even if your boss is having trouble, maybe it's a budgetary thing or whatever, and they have to let you go, then ideally you'll have people in other departments who are more than willing to snatch you up if that's the case. And again, it's the same thing in your networking outside of your own company. You can also do these same things. And then if something happened to your company and you end up being let go, not only do you have a network of people who know who you are and appreciate your work, but if you've already been providing value to them, then it makes it easier for them to then reach out and maybe offer you a job there. So, and this is the same thing where the one from this past week was really a combination of multiple of these things, right? There are things people were complaining about in the field because things weren't working the way they felt like they should. There were places where people were cutting corners. There are places where it was overly complicated. And there are places where people were literally calling out for help with this. And so I was able to knock out all of those pain points with a pretty clear, straightforward process that uncomplicates things. It's different from the way they've been doing it, so there is a bit of a learning curve, but it's really not that hard. And the results that are being seen in the field when they actually implement this make that learning curve absolutely worth it. So, and so that just, people walking up to me, thanking me for the presentation I was giving because it made certain things make sense to them and gave them hope for, a better outcome in the future. And then outside of those sessions, I would have people in the field come up to me and say, hey, we implemented this from when you first started talking about it, and here are the results. And, the results are literally insane sometimes. So And that is very gratifying to me to know that I am having an impact on these people and helping them do their jobs of creating opportunity and empowering others out in the field. So I just thought that I would share that with you because I've talked before about the idea of making yourself as indispensable as possible to as many people as possible. It's partnered with the second, I guess, philosophy that I took away from my grandfather about work, and that is, work for the salary you want, not the salary you make. And so if you can do those two things, and maybe I'll come up with something similar for that one as I did with this one, because what I wanted to do is not just talk about the philosophical idea. I wanted to give some real applicable steps, something you can do to actually put this into practice. So so that's the 5 C's. Once again, if you want to make yourself as indispensable as possible to as many people as possible, here's what you look for. What do people complain about? Where do they cut corners? What consumes an inordinate amount of their time? Where are things overly complex? And when do people call for help? So if you keep your ears open and your eyes open and you pick up on these things, then they'll provide the opportunities for you to make yourself as indispensable as possible to as many people as possible. All right, keep this one pretty short and we'll end it here. And thanks for coming along, and I'll see you guys on the next one. Bye.